Before 1979, the Middle East looked completely different. Iran was a wealthy, pro-Western monarchy and a foundational pillar of American security in the region. The collaboration was incredibly tight. Thousands of American expatriates lived and worked in Tehran, and the Iranian government was actively paying Israel over $1.2 billion for highly sensitive military equipment and missile technology. But underneath that booming international partnership, the state was fracturing. The Shah ruled through a brutal military dictatorship. His push for rapid westernization and widespread government corruption alienated almost every layer of Iranian society. Washington and Tel Aviv were insulated from this domestic anger. They dealt exclusively with the military and the elite, assuming the status quo was permanent. When the streets finally erupted, Iran's closest allies were caught completely off guard. In February 1979, Ayatollah Khomeini returned from a 15-year exile. He managed to do what seemed impossible, uniting Marxists, nationalists, and religious factions under a single movement to overthrow the monarchy. The scale of the uprising was staggering. 10 million Iranians flooded the streets of Tehran to welcome Khomeini, forcing the collapse of a monarchy that had ruled for nearly 4 decades. The new Islamic Republic immediately dismantled the old alliances. They severed all diplomatic ties with Israel and handed the former Israeli diplomatic compound directly over to the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Then, in November, hundreds of Islamist students breached the gates of the United States Embassy in Tehran. 52 American diplomats were taken hostage and held for 444 days. The Carter administration had zero leverage. They were entirely unprepared for the sheer intensity of the anti-American anger that fueled the hostage crisis, ultimately leading to a total diplomatic freeze. Those 444 days left a permanent scar on American institutional memory. Washington's policy toward Iran shifted overnight from strategic partnership to a long-term strategy of containment and proxy warfare. The confrontation moved out of Iran and into the surrounding region in 1982, when Israel launched a massive military invasion into Lebanon to push back Palestinian fighters. Tehran saw an opportunity. They deployed hundreds of Revolutionary Guards to Lebanon's Bekaa Valley. Their mission was to organize, train, and arm the local, historically marginalized Shiite community to resist the Israeli occupation. Iran merged modern guerrilla tactics with deep Shiite theology. By weaponizing the religious concept of martyrdom, a willingness to sacrifice oneself against immense injustice, mirroring the historic sacrifice of Imam Hussein, they built the ideological and military foundation for a new organization, Hezbollah. The results were devastating. Utilizing massive, covert suicide bombings, they destroyed the Israeli military headquarters in Tyre and leveled the U.S. Marine barracks in Beirut, killing 241 American service members. Lebanon became the proving ground for Iran's new strategy. By operating through local proxies, Tehran realized it could successfully inflict heavy casualties and force the retreat of Western superpowers, entirely avoiding a direct state-on-state war. By 1991, the United States was attempting to broker a new Middle East at the Madrid Peace Conference, but Washington deliberately excluded Iran, driven by the lingering resentment of the 1979 hostage crisis. Iranian leaders realized that as long as they remained quiet, they would be ignored. To force Washington to pay attention, Tehran hosted its own counter-conference, cementing financial and military ties with Hamas and Islamic Jihad to build what they called the axis of resistance. Israel tried to decapitate this growing network by assassinating Hezbollah's leader, Abbas Musawi, in 1992. But the strike backfired. A month later, a devastating car bomb tore through the Israeli embassy in Argentina, proving the shadow war now had global reach. A decade later, the September 11th attacks briefly aligned American and Iranian interests. In 2001, Iranian diplomats and Revolutionary Guards actively assisted U.S. forces in dismantling their mutual enemy, the Taliban, in Afghanistan. But the Bush administration dismissed this cooperation. In his 2002 State of the Union, the president labeled Iran a charter member of the Axis of Evil, slamming the door on any diplomatic thaw. For Tehran, this public rejection confirmed their worst fear. The United States was actively pursuing regime change. To secure their survival against an American invasion, Iranian leadership made a critical decision to accelerate their uranium enrichment program. The proxy skirmishes were now overshadowed by an existential threat. Iran was developing a sprawling nuclear infrastructure, pushing the conflict into a high-stakes regional struggle. The Obama administration concluded that bombing those nuclear sites would ignite the entire Middle East. Instead of a military strike, they initiated highly classified direct negotiations with Tehran to halt the weapons program. Israel viewed this diplomacy as a fatal mistake. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was so fiercely opposed that he bypassed the White House, traveling to Washington to urge Congress to kill the negotiations. The opposition failed. In 2015, the two sides signed the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. It was a massive geopolitical trade. Iran agreed to strict limits on its nuclear enrichment in exchange for the lifting of crippling economic sanctions. For a brief moment, the nuclear agreement actually looked like a way out. Millions of Iranians saw the lifting of sanctions as a chance to finally re-enter the global economy after decades of isolation. But that diplomatic bridge collapsed just 3 years later. The United States unilaterally withdrew from the deal in 2018, instantly snapping the region back into a volatile cycle of economic embargoes and military retaliation. This animated map illustrates the current reality of the conflict. It's a highly active, multi-front war fought through cyber attacks, drone strikes, and a deeply entrenched network of proxy militias stretching from Yemen and Syria to Lebanon and Gaza. 4 decades after the fall of the Shah, neither side has been able to look past the political trauma of 1979. And as long as those deep historical wounds remain open, the Middle East will stay locked in this undeclared war.